This episode of the Citadel Cafe is brought to you by listeners like you. Visit patreon.com/the Citadel Cafe to find out how you can become a patron and help make this show possible. This is the Citadel Cafe, episode number 474 for Wednesday, December 20th, the Holiday Roundtable, which we do every year. My name is Joel Duggan, and the Citadel Cafe is where my friends and I hang out to talk about the geeky stuff that we're into. This year, joining me, James the Civilian. Hello, James.
Hello, thank you for having me back.
My pleasure, my friend. It's been a fun year of actually seeing you in person at least once a month, and now we get to continue the trend of having you on the Holiday Roundtable. Also joining me, Stephen, and you can find Stephen at StephenESC on Twitch and on social media. Hello, Stephen.
Hello to you. How are you?
I am doing well. I have a seasonal drink. It is a plantation rum, and I'm going to enjoy it throughout the episode. It's a large glass of rum, so be prepared. And finally, Alastair McFly on Twitch and co-host of Long Range Sensors, a Star Trek retrospective podcast. Hello, Alastair.
Hello. Good to be back, as always.
Yes, it's been a minute since both Alastair and James have been on the show. Stephen, of course, is a regular once-a-month co-host. So usually at the top of the show, we like to check in and see what's going on in the nerdy realm as of late. And we'll start with James. So James, what's in the last few weeks or so? Like, what's been new? What's been happening in the nerdy life?
We're doing a lot of game emulation lately. I've really gotten into game emulation. I've got the really nice MacBook Pro for my own just kind of personal use, and they're really powerful now. They've come a long way in terms of being great game emulation devices. So I've been, kind of like PlayStation 2, GameCube era kind of game emulation, and they all work really nicely with like modern game controllers as well. So I've been able to use like my Nintendo Switch Pro controller. So that's kind of the newest nerdy thing I think I've been up to in the last few weeks.
I've always wanted to grab one of those emulator boxes. I think a couple of years ago, the Nintendo Entertainment System and the Super Nintendo were really popular, and they were really tiny. Like they were little, like the little size of a Walkman, and you would just use them as like a little set-top box, and they would have like 20 or 30 games or something on them, kind of like the key games from that era in gaming. And I remember, Street Fighter 2 and Super Mario World and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that might have even come out before the Switch, because I think people that have Switches can just go buy those legacy games and play them on the Switch, right?
So Nintendo has like their online service that you can pay for, and it's two-tiered now. And depending on which tier you get access to so many of those old school games. So it's part of their subscription service. I think it's like $25 for $20 a year for the lower tier, and $50 a year for the higher tier, something like that.
$50 a year or a month?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
a year. Okay, a year. I was like, you said $20. I was like, oh my gosh, Nintendo doesn't have a catalog deep enough for for $20 a month.
No, it's yearly. It might be a little more. That might be American pricing I might have given you. But even still, it's very cheap compared to like the offerings from Microsoft or Sony. And I think the higher tier gets you like Nintendo 64 and Game Boy Advance stuff. And the lower tier gets you Game Boy Color, Super Nintendo, NES.
Wow.
And if you go a little bit higher, you can get the family pack, which is what I've got.
They don't have like GameCube era stuff though, so like the new, or I shouldn't say new, it's like 20 years old at this point, but some of that newer stuff is still not available through Nintendo services in a good way, other than the odd remaster they might put out here or there.
So that's one advantage of Game Pass, is that you've got studios that are owned by Microsoft, now Bethesda, and I can't remember the studio that made Halo off the top of my head, the latest Halo. But like those AAA games come out with my monthly sub. The monthly sub is $20. Like it rivals Netflix, but the catalog is pretty deep. I will say that I don't have time to play all the games that I have access to. And so that's pretty good. And I feel like what I like about the Microsoft subscription is there seems to be a really solid offering in every genre. Like if you like racing games, there's at least one, if not a couple. If you like fighting games, there's at least a couple of those. If you like first-person shooters, there's a ton. And then RPGs and adventure kind of map out the rest of it. The only criticism I would have is that a lot of the time it's indie games. And so that can be a crapshoot as to whether it's going to be a good time or not. Sometimes they're good. Sometimes they're a game that you've never heard of, and you're just like, "Oh no, this is really cool." I'm playing one called Luna, and that's like a platformer, and it's sweet. Like it's very chill, and it's a puzzle game, and that's fine. But I wouldn't have heard about it otherwise outside of the subscription. And then there's other games that like I've definitely heard of, and they're on my list, like Gears of War. Gotham Knights, the new offering from like the people that made the Arkham games or Arkham style games, I guess. And what else do I have on my playlist right now? Or not playlist, but like my short. They call it Play Later. You can kind of bookmark stuff, so you can create your own short list of things. A couple of Star Wars titles that I haven't gotten to, and there is Starfield, which I didn't really continue to play because it didn't really grab me, and also now No Man's Sky. So there's a couple of games. I mean, like I am already invested anyway, and I play Java Minecraft. But for people that were into things like Minecraft and No Man's Sky, there are some games on offer on Microsoft Game Pass that are huge sandbox games. Like hundreds, if not thousands, of hours can be spent in these games, and I think that that certainly helps add to the value of the subscription service. But I imagine PlayStation has the same. I'm not a PlayStation user. I don't think anybody else here is either. Alastair, you just do computer games, right?
I have an old PlayStation 3, but that's about as recent as I go for that.
Got the PlayStation 5, and
Oh, you do?
I do, yeah. I'm not as familiar with Sony's offerings as I am Nintendo. It's a bit more, my understanding is anyway, it's a bit more hit or miss with Sony. They do have some kind of like streaming game offering, and that's how you can get a lot of the older stuff. And you can buy some of the older games just kind of piecemeal, but it's not quite on the level of a Game Pass or even like a Switch Online where you get like all the old stuff really readily and available, especially when you get into third party stuff, because Sony, that third party library is really what makes Sony so great. But it's okay, but it's still not on the level of a Game Pass yet, I think.
The thing that I like about Game Pass is that if you have a favorite that was like an Xbox 360 game or even an Xbox One game, then you can play that. And it's only been recently, I think, that some of the titles on Game Pass have been current gen. A lot of the Game Pass titles were previous gen, and that's fine, but especially if there's a well-made game, good story, but you're not going to necessarily see the graphic fidelity that the Xbox is capable of. I've got a Series X. Unless you're playing something brand new, like a Forza, Horizon 5, or what's another one? I mean, I didn't like the gameplay, but Starfield looked pretty. And I'm trying to think of something else that I've been playing that has like next gen graphics, but it's slipping my mind. I guess No Man's Sky uses it for the lighting, but No Man's Sky is also, it's not a current gen game. It was kind of made for the previous generation. It'll be interesting to see what happens with newer offerings as things march on. I know that the release date on Game Pass games is now getting into more like 2021, 2019, whereas before a lot of them were like 2015, 2017, that kind of deal. And so they're a lot newer now, which is cool. Alastair, what has been on your nerdy plate the last little while?
My annual rewatch of Stargate. It starts as it always does, where it's just like, I need to just watch like a couple of episodes, and then suddenly I'm just in the thick of it, and it's just non-stop Stargate. So I've just been working my way through that. But the other big thing I've been doing is working on my passion project that I've been doing over the last several months. And I'm now starting to reach the end of the clearing where I feel like I'm not too far away from launching it. So it's my website called Nostalgia Zone. It's really a love letter to the old internet and just a place for me to get back into writing. Because you'll remember this, Joel, from like a couple of websites that I've had. I've had some stuff where I've written articles and things. And this is where I get to just talk more about just stuff that makes me feel nostalgic and that I love. So there'll be a lot of stuff about old toys and and game systems and things like that, which will be a lot of fun. But the website is been built on period hardware using period software, and it's all been written in HTML4. So it's really fast. And it just looks like an old website from the late 90s and early 2000s. And I've been really enjoying doing it. There's a lot of like the old advertising buttons that you would see. I've been trying to find like old advertising banners, and they actually link to actual websites in the Internet Archive. It's been a whole thing. I think I started work on it about a year ago. So
Wow.
it's been about a year's work. Yeah, I mean, I've been doing that as well as bringing long range sensors back. So it's not been like non-stop, but a lot of my downtime has basically just been going back to this. And it's nice going back and just coding again the way that I did when I first started out, because I taught myself HTML4 back when that was the latest thing. And so it's been kind of therapeutic in a way.
I remember learning HTML, but I don't remember what version it was. It would have been around the late 90s, I guess.
Mm.
It would have been around when I was in university, because that's when I started putting some of my work online and started doing comic work and trying to get freelance stuff around 2001, 2002. I would have been in animation school. I would have definitely had a website when I was done animation school, because I would have been trying to find a job. So
Yeah,
that was
I'd say
definitely
that
up
would
there.
have been, yeah, I would say that was probably HTML4.
Probably 4.
Yeah, I tell you what, the thing that has probably been the most surprising is how many times I'll put something in and be like, why doesn't this work? And then realizing that was HTML5. And it's like,
Yeah.
right, that came later. That didn't exist back then. And trying to get a website that not only looks and feels and evokes the kind of nostalgia that you would have from that time. This is designed to work on classic browsers and modern browsers. So I've got to get cross-compatibility over 25 years.
Wow.
And that has been an interesting challenge, but it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun, and I can't wait to release it. Still not quite there yet, but we're getting there, which is good.
Well, when you have it ready, let me know, and we'll obviously have you back on the show to talk about it and be able to share it with people and have a link and all that kind of stuff. And I've seen snippets. I think I've just seen screenshots. I don't know if I feel like we may have been hanging out one time and you showed me like a working version. I can't remember.
That's
exactly.
Right. I showed you an early build of it.
Yeah.
I think probably about 3 months ago.
Yeah.
When
I think
I was
it was
over
here,
at your place.
right? Yeah.
It was at your place. Yeah.
Yeah. And like it immediately looks exactly like what I remember the late 90s, early 2000s web to be, as far as my limited experience was at the time, because I believe I had a home computer, but I don't think we had home internet until after I was done high school. I think any internet stuff came for me in university when I was where of course they had like a local network, and we were playing StarCraft in the dorms. But also
Nice.
we had the internet for school and research and stuff like that, which is great. But it was a while. 'Cause I don't think I even had a personal computer until my senior year. I think I bought it after my third year in university and took it back with me for my senior year, because I was the editor at the school paper. Not the editor, the comics section editor. And
Nice.
yeah, no, that was a while ago. And I needed it because I had to do like layout and stuff. And I used to bring the layout. I'd have it at home. And here's to get people to realize how long ago this was. It was faster and more reliable for me to put the layout for the paper on a zip disk and walk it to the lab, to the newspaper lab, and put it on the Mac there and have it be part of the printing process than it was for me to try to send it somewhere. Like it was faster to use a backpack, which was not great in -30 in New Brunswick, in January, but it had to be done.
Yeah, good old sneaking it. I was actually at one point thinking, like, with this old computer that I've got, do I hook that up so that it's on the network? No, I've got zip disks. So I'm doing that exact same thing. When I want to just transfer something from my old Mac to my new Mac, I'm just shoving it onto a zip disk and transferring it over. So I'm back to the old sneakernet, and it's a lot of fun.
I used to do that from Mac to PC here in the studio. I used to have to do that until I got used to using Google and other things like that. But Yeah, it's wild when you think about how far things have come. At the same time, though, as someone that has to use like 2 or 3 different browsers to manage 2 or 3 different podcasts and personal accounts for different media and outlets and stuff like that, browsing and browsers are bloated and cause me no end of grief in my day to day. Where like there's a couple times, depending on the website, where you just kind of like, you click on this thing and like, all right, I'm going to go refill my glass of water because I have to wait just to type in this text field. Like, it is infuriating sometimes.
Then I think you'll feel at home on the nostalgia zone, because there's none of that. It is incredibly fast. I'm really proud of it.
Nice. Very, very cool. Stephen, what's been in your nerdy calendar lately?
For me, I've started reading a book called Axiom's End this past month. It's science fiction novel by Lindsay Ellis. It's set in 2007, and I haven't quite figured out why it was set in 2007. It's possible that the author was trying to get it in before the smartphone era, just so they didn't have to worry about the connectedness of all of people would just be so much more connected as soon as the smartphones became popular. So maybe it was just trying to avoid that. But yeah, overall, it's pretty good. It's essentially it's about a U.S. government cover-up of contact with extraterrestrial life, and the main character is conveniently. I mean, there's no surprise. You kind of read it on the back of the book. It's just conveniently a former linguistics student that becomes the main contact point for first contact with aliens. So it's like essentially the only human that can communicate with them, even though they never finished their communications degree. So, or linguistics degree. So there's, kind of eye roll at the convenience of, of that school, like, that education choice just happening to work out in favor of the storyline. But overall, it's pretty good. It feels like it's picked up now, so I'm enjoying it quite a bit. But for the first little bit, I found it a little bit confusing in terms of. I feel like they could have used some Oxford commas in there to break up the sentences a little bit more. And the main character's name is Cora, but then her mom's name is Demi, and her aunt's name is Luciana. But they never really refer to them as her mom or her aunt, or it was always just a lot of first person naming, which just sort of confused it. It didn't really kind of, in my mind anyway, didn't really separate. It just clarify their familial relationship really well, just because just first name basis seemed odd at first. But either way, it's pretty good. I'm about halfway through now, so it's enjoying it enough to keep reading it.
I think it's impressive that you're halfway through a book. I tend to bail within the first couple of chapters, and it's no fault of the book. It's a fault of my own personal habits of like watching YouTube and being on my phone and then going from phone right to bed. Like I don't tend to have a reading habit. So like I applaud the fact that you're reading a book with all the screens that we have these days.
Yeah, I don't have much of a reading habit either. It's just I've actually been thinking I might try see if I can commit to it. Try to read like one book a month. But my problem is as soon as I start, I'm basically non-existent in other realms of my life until the book is done, because my wife, she's good at reading a chapter and going, "Oh, that was great. Looking forward to reading it tomorrow." And for me, I read the end of the get to an end of a chapter, and it seems interesting enough to push me on to the next one. It's like, so long, sleep. We're continuing, and then I'll just, basically until my eyes feel like sandpaper at 3:00 in the morning sometimes, and I'll go to bed. I binge my books the way I would binge a Netflix show.
The way that you're going through these books is pretty much how it is for me in Stargate, so I can absolutely relate to that.
Yeah. So I kind of have to strategically pick when I'm wanting to start a book, because I know that if I do, then it's other things will suffer if I start a book. So, but if I say, okay, one a month, and I know for that 4 to 5 day chunk of time I'm going to be non-productive, then I'm good with that. But
I think for me, and I know I've mentioned this on the show before, it's about comfort. I don't really have a good spot to sit and read, and the living room's okay, but I spend so much of the time in the living room watching TV that it just kind of feels like the same old, same old. And I could, make an effort to read in bed, but like I don't find reading in bed
Oh, no.
comfortable. Like I find my back hurts within 20 minutes. I'm just, not there. What I used to do in fine weather, especially after the winter, as soon as springtime hits and I can sit outside in a hoodie when, 10 degrees, that kind of thing, and the warm sunshine, I'd grab lunch outside. And then after I'd finish eating, I'd sit there and read for half an hour, 45 minutes. And
Nice.
I found that was a nice habit because it would break up the computer time during the day and all that. And I did find it easier to do when I wasn't reading like narrative. Like if I was doing a biography, like I had a Disney bio that I was reading. I was reading some World of Warcraft Chronicle books, which were just like history of the, mythical world, not really like they were stories, but it wasn't like one big novel. And I did find that one of the sci-fi novels that I was reading lately, which is good, and I know I've talked about it, but I'm blanking on the name right now because it's been so long. And then I have that problem of like, oh crap, it's been like 4 months since I've picked up that book. I'm not even sure if I remember where I am.
Even if you did, you almost have to go back and read some more of it just to kind of
Yeah.
bring yourself back up to speed.
At least a chapter. I've certainly done that where I've backed up a chapter before. And I'm
Mhm.
still reading Patrick Stewart's book, but I find that that's easier to pick up and put down in smaller chunks because he's telling like small snippets about his life, not necessarily like you have to
Right.
read the entire chapter in one sitting sort of deal. So that's been fun. The nerdy thing for me is that I canceled Disney Plus. And we've been talking about this back and forth a couple times over the last few months on the show
Yeah.
about the streaming services getting more and more expensive, and some of them not offering what I feel are, equivalent to the value. In Canada, Disney Plus jumped from $11.99 a month to $14.99 a month. Now that is before tax, which around here is 15%. So we're up into the $17.50 range by the time taxes are on that. And now that's for the 4K Ultra HD HDR, no ads. That's the plan. I go for the 4K on these services because I have a 4K TV and I want to enjoy the picture from the shows or movies that offer it. It's a very cool experience, so I want to go there. It is only $11.99 or still $11.99 for 1080p HD, no ads. But here's the thing that really rubbed me the wrong way. It's $7.99 a month for HD with ads. Now, I get that they're offering some tiers, but like if you're paying $8 plus tax, you're into the $10 range, and there's advertisements, like I would be so I mean, I know it's geared to like force people into the $11.99, the middle tier. Like that's always what they want you to buy. They don't want you to buy the small. They don't want you to buy necessarily the extra large. They want you to buy the large all the time, right? They want that to feel like the best value. Starbucks does the same thing. And I just don't feel that Disney Plus has the constant library that Netflix does to warrant something that's pushing $20. Netflix for me is a little over $20 again because I go for the 4K HDR package, but it offers a ton of stuff, and a lot of it is all like Disney original content from the service provider. So a lot of Disney stuff that I want is Star Wars, either animated stuff or Marvel, and that's not going anywhere. That's not leaving the platform because it's Disney, right? So they're always going to keep that kind of long shelf life on those. So that's good, and that I don't feel bad walking away from something like Disney Plus because I don't feel like I'm going to miss anything. I'll just resub whenever the next Star Wars show that's worth watching comes around. And looking ahead, it doesn't seem like that's going to be for a while. So it could be a little bit without Disney Plus. The only thing that I find I might succumb to is like if I do want to watch some of the Star Wars films, or if I do want to rewatch some of the Marvel films, which I have done from time to time, I'll have to resub for the month to do that. So I'll have to pick and choose my battles there. But I'll probably try to coincide that subscription month with something at least new that's on Disney Plus that I'd be interested in. But it's part of my January culling. I will be temporarily canceling Netflix because I think Avatar: The Last Airbender comes out in March or something. They're a live action version of that. So I'm only going to be unsubbed from Netflix for a little while until something else comes out that I want to watch on it. But I'm only unsubbing from Netflix just because it's the most expensive of all of the things. And the other streaming services that I'm taking part in are things like Amazon Prime, which is tied into my Prime, shipping, and other services that are bundled. So it makes sense to keep the ones that are bundled because I need the other stuff anyway. So those services are staying. But yeah, not Netflix. Disney Plus got the axe this week. So and I did it right after they charged me to send a message like, oh, 1740 whatever. Screw you. I'm unsubscribing. Why did you unsubscribe, Joel? Because it's too expensive. Check the box. Send. Like, just I think so much of it too, because I follow a lot of like artists and creators and other people that do this kind of thing on the internet, and some of the, were very supportive of the acting strikes and the writer strikes in the US. And just to know that, Disney was trying to get like blood from the stone, and then they're jacking the price of the streaming service, which I can't cost them that much money. Like it's evergreen content, and it's like, yes, they're producing new things, but like the amount of people that are subbed on Disney Plus, I don't understand how they can justify the $3 increase, which $3 doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a good like 30% more, Anyway, I don't think it's worth it. I think that I need to get in a better habit of subbing and unsubbing to these services, which is very easy to do. I remembered to do it this month because I made a big red note in my calendar to say like unsub right after you pay the bill on December 19th, unsub, because I wanted it for Christmas, because some of my favorite Christmas specials are on Disney. And so I'll watch some stuff over Christmas, and then it'll just naturally run out midway through January, and then that's it. And I don't have to worry about remembering to cancel in January, So in this process, I think I'm also kind of trying to roll some of my subscriptions back around to the first of the month, so that I can kind of like sub and unsub like right at the first and kind of keep it nice and tidy. That's just weird bookkeeping, Joel, wanting things in order. But yeah, it's not something that I'm going to be continuing, which is like just keeping these services on in the background, because I've noticed that 9 times out of 10 when I sit in front of the TV, I'm turning on YouTube and watching some of my favorite creators on YouTube, which I do pay for. Like I pay for premium so I don't have ads. But like if I look at the amount of time I spend on YouTube, the fact that it comes to like $14 taxes in, it's worth it given the amount of time and the amount of content that's there. But it doesn't measure up when you compare some of these other services. So anyway, that's kind of where I landed on that. And speaking of these streaming services, this is where we're going to move into our main discussion. And this is kind of just a loose idea I had for looking ahead to 2024 and the trends that I've seen and we've been talking about more and more on the Citadel Cafe over the last year, maybe even the last 2 years. So got a couple of different topics. We can kind of bounce back and forth between them because I feel like they're kind of related. And the first is upcoming films and series in early 2024 that we're looking forward to. I'll have a link in the chat to a short list. People can reference it if they want. And the other thing is limited series versus film releases. So for the longest time on the Citadel Cafe, we were always talking about a new series or like a TV series that would have been on like a terrestrial television show like Game of Thrones or something like that. And then now we're talking more about limited series. Like a good example would be Obi-Wan Kenobi, 6 episodes, that kind of thing. And the franchises that we follow seem to lean towards these limited series or series in general, because like I just mentioned, they keep you around on the streaming services longer than just a single film. And we still have films, and we still have some films releasing on streaming, and we still have some films releasing in box office. But for the most part, it seems like a lot of the offerings from Marvel and Star Wars and some of the big things that we follow a lot on this show seem to be going the way of series. So I'm wondering how we're all kind of feeling about that. And then when it comes to that kind of stuff, when it comes to those franchises, those IPs, do we want more from things like Marvel, Star Wars, Star Trek, or are we happy to see new entries in the fantasy genre and sci-fi genre, time travel, like the nerdier side of films and entertainment? Like, do we want that to be more unique, or are we happy for Star Wars 19, or whatever, we get in the next little while? So we'll start with James. So in terms of anything that's coming new in 2024, and then you don't have to have a long list, but if you have 1 or 2 things that are kind of sticking in your mind as like you're looking forward to that next year, anything come to mind?
It's a short list. I'm not one to keep up with the latest and greatest. I tend to be kind of delayed and pick and choose from the back catalog, if you will. There are a couple things though in 2024 and actually coming out later in 2023 even that I'm kind of looking forward to. start off with a classic Star Trek Lower Decks. There's another season coming, I'm pretty sure. Maybe Alastair can confirm that for me. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure there's another season coming.
Yes, there is. Yeah.
Excellent. The way they ended it, it seemed like there's another season coming.
It's not wrapped up. It's not ended. They're still continuing with that show.
Yeah, they ended
Thankfully.
on a bit of a cliffhanger too, so it seemed like there's
Yeah.
another season coming. And I've mentioned it before. That's kind of like my wife's Star Trek. That's the one I can sit down with her and watch, and she can really enjoy. So it's a nice thing we can do together, and I can share the fandom with her. So I always look forward to another season of Lower Decks.
Yeah. I think the plan is 5 seasons. I think I recall hearing. So this might be the last one coming up, but who knows?
And Mike McMahon too has made some statements that like maybe this might be it the next season. You know, it's been 5 years. Paramount's looking to cut costs. Those kind of statements have been coming out. So yeah, this might be the last season. Alice, I think you might be right. In terms of 2023, there's a couple things already out that I want to watch. I have not watched the new Ninja Turtles movie yet. I want to try and get to that over Christmas. Especially where my older son has like started to show an interest in Ninja Turtles. So I was like, oh, okay, this is a good excuse to watch the movie.
Yeah.
And then as well, going back to 2024, there's a couple anime movies coming out. Spy Family was the big anime hit of last year. If I was on last year, I would have been raving about Spy Family. They got a movie coming out sometime around Christmas, actually, 2023, and coming to North America in 2024. So that's pretty cool. And there's a wrestling movie from A24. A24 Studios have been making a lot of really good movies, critically acclaimed movies, and they have a wrestling movie coming out called The Iron Claw about the Von Erich wrestling family. And that's coming out soon as well, actually. So I'm kind of looking forward to that. But yeah, I don't have a big list. I know I said 3 or 4 things there, but I don't have a big list overall. I'm usually behind on the upcoming stuff.
We've talked about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle Mutant Mayhem on the show. I think the last time we talked about it was October 11th when I saw it, but I think you saw it in the summer, Stephen. It was like August 9th or something. So we've talked about it a couple of times and 100% worth a watch.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Can we discuss, age range on your son, James? Because I think there's some of the humor might be a little old.
He's pre-K still, so doesn't quite get all of it, but it's bright and colorful and action-packed.
Probably no harm, no foul. Anything's going to go over his head.
Yeah.
That's inappropriate.
Oh yeah, it's all going over his head.
And the voice acting for the turtles is really good, and I feel like it really would land well with that age group because they're all teenagers. They've got some of them like high squeaky voices when they get hurt and stuff like that. So it kind of I think it would lend itself well to that age range. So it'll be enjoyable even if they don't get it all. It'll still be enjoyable.
Yeah, and like I said, we go to the toy store too now, and when we walk down the toy aisle, he always picks up the Ninja Turtles stuff now. Like,
okay.
I don't really know where that came from, but he got there himself. But I was like, okay, I'm okay with that. I like Ninja Turtles.
I can bond over that.
Yeah, I could totally bond over Ninja Turtles. Absolutely. One thing I wanted
to
to
say,
Joel.
machine over at mine if you guys need to come over and play sometime as well.
Oh yeah, right.
So it's funny you mentioned that, Alastair. One of the arcades here at the mall, one of the local malls here, they have a little arcade, and one of the machines is a Ninja Turtles machine. And sure enough, this weekend, what did he want to do? He wanted to go to the arcade, and he found the Ninja Turtles machine.
Nice.
And he's like, Daddy, I want to play. So I had to go get the coins, and I had to play every Ninja Turtle. I died, and I had to play every single Ninja Turtle before he let me go. Just wanted to add one thing to your previous statement, Joel, about the streaming services. I've actually started building out a movie collection because of the price hikes on some of the streaming services and stuff coming and going from services. So when I do get the urge to watch an old favorite, I don't have to sign up for a new service. I've got it on the shelf. And Blu-rays are cheap now. Like I got Jurassic Park for $5 on Blu-ray at Walmart. Like,
nice.
Great.
Jeez,
looks really good.
Smart.
Yeah, it looks really nice on the big TV. I've got the PlayStation 5. I've got the nice player. Even some of the 4K stuff now, some of it's still really expensive, but some of it is starting to come down in price where it's like kind of reasonable. Like I got the 4-pack of the Kirk Star Trek movies for like $50 on 4K. And I bought Star Trek 6 separately as well. And I watched that on the big TV and it looks fantastic. Just that uncompressed video signal. Disney Plus has really good 4K support actually, but even still having that uncompressed 4K signal on the local machine on the TV for relatively good price, it looks really nice. And yeah, I've really taken to building out a physical media collection in the last 3, 4, 5 months just because of all those price hikes.
I have the 4K TV, but it's not the fanciest panel, so I don't get the highest frame rate, and it does a good kind of like interpolation for things like video games, where it'll give you like 2K, or it'll preference saying like, do you want performance and frame rate for like first person shooter competitive stuff, which I don't do, or do you want it to look good? And I was like, well, I always go for like, look the best you can. I don't really care whether my frames, I'm not going to notice, playing Assassin's Creed Valhalla or something, that my frames are not hitting a crisp, 60 frames a second. I'm not going to bring that in. But if I remember correctly, last time we had a beer, you have a nice TV. You've got like a Sony TV, right?
Yeah, I got a Sony 65-inch TV hooked up to the PlayStation downstairs.
The upscaling on nicer panels and combined with either like the next gen consoles like you have, that would be a better experience. I don't know that I've tried to watch. I think I have watched The Fellowship of the Ring, and that's a regular DVD. That's not no, it's a Blu-ray, but it's not a 4K version. And so it must look okay, but that's one of those films where like, I'm not really going to be that worried if it looks a little bit more like a film, like it might look a little bit too digital if it went to a full 4K resolution on an upscale. But the only time I've actually watched something in 4K, it's been in a streaming situation. So I don't have any hard media locally to compare it to.
So to talk about my experience a little bit, like I watched Star Trek 6 locally 4K with the TV and the PlayStation. And on the one hand, yeah, it's a movie from 1991 and it looks it in some scenes. But there are other scenes where that HDR signal really rips off the TV. Like one scene that really stands out is when the Klingons come for dinner on the Enterprise, and Chang is really like right up in Kirk's face. And I just remember that lighting on his face in the transporter room just looks so good in HDR on the big TV. So it kind of depends a little bit on the movie and the age, but even though it looks like a movie from 1991 still, it still looked really good on the panel. So you can have really good experiences, but kind of to your point too, you need to have a studio that kind of does that right, if you know what I mean. It does right by the material and really makes it look good rather than just a quick port. But I mean, even Blu-ray still, like I'm watching stuff on Blu-ray. I'm watching some anime on Blu-ray actually from 20 years ago, and it looks great on the TV, even on Blu-ray. So, like I said, it's really cheap now. Some prices on some of that stuff are really starting to come down, and you can build an okay collection for a pretty reasonable price.
Steven, anything on your short list that you're looking forward to in 2024?
I guess the two biggest things I'm looking forward to are not necessarily, they're a little ways off, but Arcane Season 2 is supposed to drop in November.
Oh, nice.
And then Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse. It was supposed to come out in March, but with the actors' strike, it looks like it's been pushed back, and the official date is to be determined or to be announced. So for me, like Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, I'm talking, I guess, for people who aren't familiar, there's the animated series that follows Miles Morales as the main character as opposed to Peter Parker. And the second movie in the series, the Across the Spider-Verse, is like, it's my kind of viewing / movie highlight of 2023. I thought it was so good. We bought it, watched it a second time. It is it's fantastic. So yeah, short list. I mean, I've got other things on those are my two must see things that I want to see for sure. And then other things like Madam Web, Dune 2, things that I think will be cool, big screen theater experiences, but they're not. I don't. If I miss them, then I won't be terribly disappointed.
Right.
But
yeah,
but the Beyond the Spider-Verse, I'm do what I can to make myself go see that in the theater.
I'm going to learn from my mistake this year and go see that third one in theater with you or just on my own, because I still haven't seen Across the Spider-Verse. I'm waiting for it to come out on a streaming service where I can it's part of the subscription. Right now you can rent it, and you've been able to rent it for a month or more, but I'm waiting for it to kind of hit the streaming services, and just hasn't yet. So hopefully if it ever comes to Disney, hopefully it happens before the 19th of January.
Yeah.
Otherwise I'm going to miss out. But I've seen, Into the Spider-Verse has been on Netflix for a really long time. So,
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully it'll come there as well. And the nice thing about those is that they're that kind of mix of like, it's still part of Marvel, which is part of Disney, but it's still a Sony thing. And so it's a separate entity. And so it has a little bit more of a freedom as to where it's available streaming, which is nice.
And it's, if possible, better than the first one. So yeah, looking forward to the third one.
I didn't real. I forgot all about Arcane. I just kind of look at these things that are such high quality animation, think like, well, whatever, that was fantastic, but the next one is miles away because these things take so long to make.
Yeah.
And I guess it's been a year since the first Arcane series, or close to it. So having the series 2 come out in 2024 would be great. I'm looking forward to that. On my short list, it's 2023. And it's not something I'm champing at the bit to see, but I'm just kind of like looking at it like, yeah, I'll watch it with low expectations. And that's Rebel Moon Part 1 that comes out tomorrow on Netflix.
Oh, right.
Yeah, 11 p.m. Atlantic, because I guess they like to time these things now, probably specifically for Pacific, wherever Zack Snyder lives. So because that's the director and creative mind behind this, I really don't have any expectations for it, but that could be a good thing. You could walk in with a very low bar and then being like, you know what, that wasn't bad, and obviously it's not going to conclude because it's a part 1, but part 2 is coming out somewhere in May, I think, to Netflix, so it's not even a full year before you get the second half of it. So in a similar situation to Dune, it's like a 2-part series, unless Dune is going to part 3, I don't know. But speaking of sci-fi and things in 2024, I am looking forward to Star Wars Acolyte. That is going to be, I think, late, probably like November or fall, as well as Star Wars The Bad Batch Season 3. I'm really glad to have been proven wrong. I really didn't like the first experience with Bad Batch in the 7th season of Clone Wars. And then the first couple of episodes of Season 1, I was like, I don't know. I continued through it and I got hooked. And then Season 2 was fantastic. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how they handle Season 3 now that they're getting so close to other big moments in Star Wars canon, and I think it's a really interesting window. So I'm looking forward to that. Tales of the Jedi Season 2 is also something I'm looking forward to. More animation from Star Wars, which is always really fun. And this is probably on your list, Alastair. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire comes out March 29th. I really liked Afterlife. So
yeah,
that's on my short list for sure. And
yeah.
rounding out my short list is Transformers 1, which I only just heard about. It's supposed to be coming out in September of 2024, which seems strange because it's an animated feature, and you'd think that at this point they'd at least have a trailer. So it's not necessarily a good sign, but it's animated. So it's not another live-action Transformers film. It's set on Cybertron, and it's supposed to focus on the relationship between Optimus Prime and Megatron, and it's all animated. So that could look very cool. For anybody that recalls Bumblebee and the animated sequence at the start of that film, that would be very cool to see in a full-length feature. I can't believe it's taken them this long to even try it. With the tech, I mean, Transformers are made for CG animation, and they've done some TV shows, but they're always really limited, and TV has to be cranked out. So having a CG level, of animation for film, I think would be just incredible. Again, tentative on it because it seems like it's coming out very soon, having not heard about it before. So we'll have to see how that goes. Alastair, what's on your short list?
Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, absolutely. That is pretty much a given. And whilst you guys are all dropping your Disney Plus subscriptions, I'm still on the hook because Doctor Who is coming by for a Christmas special, and then early in the new year we end up with the new Doctor starting their full series then as well, played by Ncuti Gatwa. So that's very, very exciting for all of us Whovians. And then we've got a bunch of Star Trek stuff coming out as well. So Lower Decks, we've already mentioned. Discovery begins its 5th and final season in April. So that'll be wrapping up. And then there's 2 more which may or may not be in 2024. We got Strange New Worlds. They've just started filming their next season, and they should be wrapping around June, which means that if we do get it, it would be at either the very tail end of 2024, but it might go into 2025. The other one would be Star Trek Prodigy, which got cancelled, and they were so close to finishing making season 2, and they recently announced that they have completed it. And they're currently shopping it around. So I don't know what service that's going to come out on, but season 2 is ready for Star Trek Prodigy. So that's pretty good. And then the only other two that are really sort of on my big list, Deadpool 3. Very interested to see what they do with that, especially as to how that's going to tie in with the wider MCU. And one that's less on the nerdy side, I'm really looking forward to seeing the next Mission Impossible movie, which I believe is 2024. I need to just double check, but I'm pretty sure it's next year that comes out.
That might have gotten pushed. I didn't see it on this list that I was going over.
Yeah, that might be 2025, so I might be jumping the gun on that one. But I did love the last one, and I really, really need to see the the follow-up part 2 to that for Dead Reckoning.
The thing that I was looking for in 2024 that I did not see was a big Marvel tentpole movie, and that's because Captain America: Brave New World got pushed to 2025. That was supposed to be the big summer blockbuster from Marvel. And there's still Deadpool 3, but I don't really adore Deadpool. Like, I'll watch it, I'll stream it, but I'm not really going to be going out of my way. Just like you said, Steven, like, I'll see it if people want to go, but I'm not going to be kicking myself if I miss Deadpool 3 in theater. Like, I'm not going to be lining up to see that one. Dune Part 2, that's another one not really high on my list. And Madam Web was the other Marvel offering. That's a film or a series coming February 14th. I think it's a film. And it just looks weird and forced. And I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of Spider-Man offshoots. I tried to get through the second Venom movie on Netflix recently, and I never finished it. I ended up being on my phone. It was rough. And there's a lot of this stuff where they've got like the forced comedy, and people think that there's a James Gunn formula to follow, and they're just kind of inserting it where it doesn't belong. And so I'm hoping that they can get away from that. And I really, looking over the different things on offer from Marvel as far as series, because there really isn't any films that are like the MCU as we've been talking about it for the last few years. I just don't see anything of any interest to me. I think that there might be, and maybe it's good that they take a break. You know, like I kind of wonder if they just kind of cool it for a little bit and then kick it off in 2025 there with Captain America, if that would get people excited again, excited to get back into the MCU with characters that they love and they haven't seen for a little while. Because I mean, everybody loves the whole Sam Bucky bromance, right? Like I really enjoyed that series. That was one of the better series that we had from Marvel on Disney Plus, was the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So looking at these series and films and limited series specifically, because I think that those are the ones where you almost have to retrain your brain when you experience them, because you're used to having season 1, and then if it's good, maybe they'll get a season 2. Whereas sometimes these series are only 2 seasons, and there are only ever going to be 2 seasons. And I think one of my examples that I did not like was Loki. And I feel like because it was a limited series with a 2-season expanse, they kind of like, they pushed it to fill those 2 seasons when it really could have been just one long season, or they could have been more concise and have the whole thing just happen in a single season. I don't think it needed the 20 episodes or 16 episodes it had. I think that season 2 specifically was kind of a drag for me. I like how it ended. And I know that Tom Hiddleston has said that he's done with Loki. So I thought that was a good wrap. Like, I think they really did that character justice. I just felt like they took a really long, meandering way to get there. And as with anything that deals with time travel, there's just so many loops and repeats and kind of like those processes that I found a little bit tiring. Example of a good miniseries that I can think of was Obi-Wan Kenobi. Ahsoka is a good limited series, and Lessons in Chemistry, to get a little bit away from the sci-fi fantasy stuff, but a really good example of, this is a book that was too nuanced to do in a typical 2-hour movie, right? And I think they really did a good job. I didn't read the book, but I think they did a really good job of keeping that series interesting week to week. And it was well shot, obviously well acted. Brie Larson is fantastic in it. And it's just a really good example of the use of a limited series. But that's a standalone IP. It's not part of something big like Star Wars or Marvel or whatever. So my question for us is, if it's favorite book we've read or something we're looking forward to, do we want more film installments? Like, do we want DC and Marvel and Star Wars and Star Trek to continue with these streaming services and streaming series? Or do we want them to go and to return, I guess, to films. And so for Marvel to go back to like, no, 1 or 2 films a year, they're intertwined, but they're all their own standalone thing, versus feeling like you have to catch up and watch like 6 or 8 episodes of this and 6 or 8 episodes of that. So Stephen, where do you stand on limited series versus tentpole movies?
I actually don't mind limited series, just the watching habits of my household. It's just sometimes it's nice to be able to watch something that's 45 minutes to an hour while we eat dinner, or if the bulk of the people are home and we just want to hang out and watch something short. Um, for the evening, I should say, because it's obviously more of a time commitment to watch it over a longer period. But the nice thing that I like about series is that it gives us, well, we don't have to sit there and spend a half hour trying to figure out what's thing we want to watch. If we start a series, then we know there's 8
Right.
episodes, then we like, okay, we've, for the next however number of weeks we've got this as our Wednesday evening thing we watch when we know everyone's home kind of thing. It's just having that like a smaller thing to look forward to, I think is really like we've been watching, what is it? The Wheel of Time as something we've been picking away at. So I know it's season 2 came out, I forget when. And so we've been just sort of picking away at that as our series show that we can watch. And so I'm a fan of the series still, but I guess I'm getting tired of the you need to watch this series in order for the movie series. Like yeah, you need to watch all of these TV series in order for the greater MCU movie franchise and series to make sense. 'Cause I find it's, when it used to be the movies were the thing that kept you getting out to see the storyline moving forward. I liked those big, large, I guess for me, viewing events in the theater, and then coming to watch a movie. Then if you didn't feel like watching, WandaVision, or you didn't feel like watching I liked WandaVision, but just as an example,
Yeah.
then if you watched um the last Doctor Strange movie and she's in it and it's got, without the context of that TV show, suddenly it's like, oh, that's what's going on here kind of thing. So I'm tired of all the movie slash TV show tie-ins with each other. It'd be nice if they use the TV series to be more of a, oh, we've introduced a new character and this is their backstory. So when the next movie comes out, maybe the movie is going to be, and 100% enjoyable with or without this information. But if you've watched the TV show, you understand more about where this character is coming from. So the people could enjoy it on another level, but people who haven't seen the TV show aren't necessarily missing out. I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, it does. And I think a good example is what they've been doing with Star Wars, The Mandalorian specifically, because if you are familiar with all the films, then there's all these Easter eggs in The Mandalorian that has everybody like pointing and whistling at the screen. Like, I get that reference. I know what's going on here. But there's lots of people that are just, they've seen Star Wars maybe once and, the series, and they're not as steeped in it, but they thoroughly enjoy The Mandalorian because it stands up in its own right. And then vice versa, if you're watching the Star Wars films, you don't really need to see The Mandalorian at all. If you haven't seen them, then it doesn't affect episodes 9, through 11 or whatever, like, or 7 through 9. Like they have done a good job. Now, obviously, there is a movie from Filoni that's going to tie Ahsoka and The Mandalorian and stuff together, but that's more of a payoff because you watched the series, not that it's not that you are well, I guess it does have that required viewing, but they're in the right order. Like there's been enough time and there's been enough hype around these series that people have probably seen them, that if you care about the movie that Filoni is directing, you've probably already watched the stuff that he's made for TV. And that's a good balance. But I hear you on the Marvel stuff. And I think that what's happened is like they had all these major characters and then Endgame happened and some people died or went away. Their stories ended otherwise. And then they went to the second tier. Well, the second tier was doing the series, and that's fine. But then they're making the second tier the first tier. So then all of these tertiary, not required reading in the series that was on, Disney Plus are now required because these are now the major players in Marvel as opposed to just like the B tier. And that's I think what puts the pressure on to kind of keep up with all of it. And I don't know, like for me, I really enjoy when there is more time to tell a story. They're not cutting corners. It doesn't feel like the story is ham-fisted into like a little. I say little. Most films now are close to 3 hours, but it's not jammed into 3 hours. Like Kenobi, like that's a miniseries that I would not want to watch in 2.5 to 3 hours. I'm glad that it was 6, episodes, and I think they varied in length a little bit based on what story they wanted to tell, and I think that worked very, very well. And I think and there's other series that are out there that have done it as well. And Arcane that you mentioned earlier, that's another really good example too. Whereas like that could have been a film and could have been like big theatrical release, but like they couldn't have crammed all that story in there, and it would have suffered because of it. And there's just such a big, robust world in Arcane to build out that I think you need the time to do it. And if studios have the patience and they're not trying to just jam something out, then I think it's worth it. And I'm seeing it more and more in animation now, actually.
The tough thing is, though, it's like I totally agree with you. Taking the time to actually tell the story properly with the number of however many episodes you need to tell the story. But it seems to be this, and we've talked about it in different shows in the past, but it's like almost like the TV shows get the short end of the stick with special effects budgets. And so it's almost like you're getting the story that you want, but at a lower quality than you would normally get it if it were a movie. So it's just this weird, I don't know.
No, that's fair. Yeah, if it's
Yeah.
not a big thing like, Star Wars, or Marvel, that can be a little bit hokey. Although I say Marvel, sometimes the effects on Marvel series have not been the greatest.
Yeah.
James, where do you stand on the limited series versus film?
Think you kind of touched on some of my feelings already. I am kind of overwhelmed by the number of limited series, especially in the MCU. You kind of touched on it, Joel. I am that fan who was really into the MCU up until Endgame, and even after Endgame, like the first couple Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, really into it. But then there was kind of that, cooling off period right after Endgame and Spider-Man, as we just had the big climax, and now we're going to cool down and we're going to make that pivot to the next phase of the MCU. That's when the TV shows came out. That's also where I kind of fell off because, like you said, these characters who I've been watching for years have reached the end of their story. Now what? And now, years later, if I want to go back to the MCU, I have that thought in my head of like, can I pick up the newest movie and understand what's happening if I haven't watched the shows? Do I need to watch the shows? And then I sign into Disney Plus and I'm like, wow, there are a lot of shows. Do I have to watch all these? And you've touched on this actually in previous episodes before, the idea that it really isn't as mandatory as it might appear to be, but there's just that sense of I'm so behind and I'm never going to catch up. And it almost discourages me in a way. There's just so many of them. Some of the Star Wars ones I've watched, I did really enjoy. I watched Obi-Wan. I thought that looked number one. I thought it looked really good in 4K on the big TV. And number two, I just thought it was a good show and a good limited series that filled in a nice spot in the Star Wars timeline. But I haven't really touched too many more of the Star Wars stuff. I know Andor was really popular. I think that was this year. Haven't watched that yet, but overall, I'm just kind of discouraged by how many there are, and I just feel so behind that I almost can't watch the movies now. To your point, Stephen, like some of the shows are tied to the movies, and just trying to figure out which ones to start with is tough. If you're not keeping up with it, all the time, you can fall behind pretty quick, or at least you feel like you fall behind pretty quick.
Stephen, did you think that the Marvels would have been as enjoyable if you hadn't watched the Miss Marvel series?
No. I mean, for me in that sense, yeah, for me, because I read the comic,
Oh, right.
I knew who Kamala Khan was. The TV show and the, I guess, not sure the best way to say it, cinematic Marvel, including the TV shows and the movies, they've treated her powers differently. So I think you kind of need to see Ms. Marvel, the TV show, I think you should see it anyway. It's unfortunately the special effects were not super. Some of the storyline just did not live up to the comics. But Kamala Khan is like the character itself. She's so enjoyable to watch, and she really gets a chance to shine in the Marvels that I think it's worth, at the very least, kind of just going through it quickly to get a sense of what the lore is, because you get to find out what her source of power is in the TV show, and that comes up in the movie. So it's
Yeah, I almost feel like the thing that would be even more confusing to somebody who hasn't seen the series is just the relationship with her family. and how they tie into the film.
Yeah,
'Cause
and
I imagine
they're excellent in the film.
they are, but I feel like if I went into the movie without having had that context of like how they know about her powers and stuff, it would be a bit like, what? Hang on, just
Yeah,
what you would feel like you're missing something.
yeah, and then Monica Rambeau in the Marvels, you would have kind of you would have needed to watch WandaVision to know where she came from at all.
Yeah, yeah.
She's actually I might be getting the names mixed up. So in Captain Marvel, there was the daughter of the original Captain Rambeau. I can't remember the original Captain Rambeau's first name, but so the daughter was Monica Rambeau, and this is her grown up later because the original Captain Marvel took place in 1995, I believe it was, and so she's older now. She's one of the three. So if you didn't watch, yeah, WandaVision, you would have no idea where she came from. She's suddenly there with powers. So that one you would need to watch almost all the way through to get who she is and why she's in the Marvels.
Marvel certainly doesn't help themselves with these limited series or series that lead into films when they jump around in time. You're trying to
Yeah.
figure out, was this before the snap, after the snap? Is it way back in like 1995, or are we talking like, is this after the death of Tony Stark, and are we moving on? Where are we in the timeline as we are handling all this? And I mean, it's sometimes they'll give you a solid reference, and other times they just don't. And
Yeah.
you're left sitting there going like, okay, well, these are major events that are happening in this TV show. How have we never heard about this before?
Speaking of timeline though, I feel like Captain Marvel would have really benefited from like either a Disney Plus movie or like a really short run series of her own to bridge the gap between the Captain Marvel movie and the Marvels, because I think you and I touched on it when we chatted on I'm not sure it was last month or the previous month, but there is like basically the reason why the Marvels, like the problem with the Marvels is because of a huge thing that happened in between the Captain Marvel movie and the Marvels, which I think would have been a really, really interesting story that would have kind of bridged the gap. So that could have been something that would have loaned itself to a short series maybe, but because the first movie took place in 1995 and the second one took place now, they could have made that series or that other movie take place in 2004, like out of time with everything else, just have it be its own story because, sort of like they did with Wonder Woman 1984 or whatever it was. It was its own standalone thing that didn't have anything to do with the original or current DC movie storylines. It was its own thing right in the middle. So it's been nice to see that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that where these shows are moving around in the timeline, and now there's multiverse elements too. It doesn't make the shows as evergreen as you might think because
Mm,
it's hard to go back to some of these shows, and especially just the nature of TV in general. Now it's like instead of a 45-minute episode with a clear beginning, middle, and end, and a self-contained story, now you're getting these 6, 8, 10 episode seasons, and it's one story all the way through. And those individual episodes are a little less evergreen. Those shows, in the case of the MCU, where they're all part of this bigger story and they move around the timeline so much, they're less evergreen. You can't watch it in any order. You can't pick your favorite episode and just kind of watch that again. You know what I
yeah.
mean? And that makes it hard to approach some of that stuff.
Alistair, when it comes to Star Trek, lately it's been entirely series and not limited series necessarily. They've been mostly full on seasons of
Mm.
shows. Do you see any return to Star Trek films anytime soon?
Soon, probably not. I'm sure that they will do at some point. There's certainly murmurs. They are doing. Well, that being said, they are doing a TV movie. They had Section 31 that they'd kind of teased that was going to be a spin-off from Discovery and was going to be a limited run series, but that is now just a full TV movie with Michelle Yeoh. So that's something that we are getting, but it's not going to be a theatrical release. As for theatrical releases, I know that they're trying to continue the JJ universe, the Kelvin timeline ones, and potentially get a Star Trek 4, but that's been challenging for many, many reasons. And to be honest, when it comes to Star Trek, Star Trek does best on TV.
Hmm.
And I think that, like we've been saying, like MCU does its best in film, at the theater. Star Trek, I think having the JJ universe and exploring that timeline, continuing as films, I think is actually a really interesting thing to do, separate to the TV series, because then you got two distinct universes that aren't really tying in with each other. They can do their own thing. And I think that that then speaks to the strength of both of them. And even with the series that we've had with Star Trek, there's, even though they're sharing this universe, there's callbacks to various things. They're all completely standalone and they're all completely different. So somebody who likes Lower Decks may not like Discovery. Somebody who doesn't like Prodigy may love Strange New Worlds. There's something for everybody, which I think is also really, really smart with how they've done it.
I agree with you. I think that Star Trek sings on TV better than it does in the theaters in general. I still have a
Yeah.
couple of soft spots for one or two of the original series movies, and then also the next gen movies. A couple of those are favorites. And I
Yeah.
really like the J.J. Abrams series. A lot of that has to do more with the actors that are involved, and they're modern films, and there's a lot of action and fun in them.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
from what I've seen of Strange New Worlds, as much as I've enjoyed it, it's a little on the hokey side for film. Like they can get away with that kind of stuff, I feel like, in TV, but it'd have to be a more serious film, I think, for it to get the box
Yeah.
office grandeur that they would want, right?
Plus, with Star Trek on television, it's always been like a morality play. And there's a lot of character driven stuff. And this is one of the reasons why people feel that Star Trek The Next Generation's first two seasons weren't their strongest, because they didn't get character driven until season 3. And that's one of the things where you can really explore that with a TV series. With Strange New Worlds, they are doing the same thing. They're focusing on, like, here's an Uhura episode, here's a Spock episode, and you get to really dig deep into that. With a film, they do a lot of the time try and replicate a little bit like what we had with The Wrath of Khan. And I mean, especially with Into Darkness as well, because that was pretty much just the same thing. But it's the idea that there is an overarching villain that they have to stop. And it's almost like that's the formula you have to do to make a big movie. You need to have, like, either the Borg or the Romulans or the Klingons. There's got to be, or some individual, like in Star Trek 5 where you've got Cybok. There's got to be some big villain to defeat. Whereas on the TV shows, it doesn't have to be a villain. It can be a circumstance. It can be a mystery. There's so much more that they can do variety-wise.
That's kind of the weird thing about Star Trek too. It's like if you look at sort of where the most up to date timeline of Star Trek is, it's kind of in a weird spot. Like the
Mm.
Borg, we've seen a lot of recently. The Romulans, the Romulan Empire has completely crumbled. The Klingons are our friends now. There kind of isn't that big bad in Star Trek right now that you could make a movie around. Right? It's in a weird spot.
And for me, it's also like when you're saying as well, Joel, about what makes the most sense for these tempo things. One of the things that's actually had me thinking about this a lot is actually related to Stargate, because we've got a really weird situation with that now, where it started as a movie, then they made a spin-off TV show, which then spun off 2 additional shows. And they were going to continue the movie series, but they stopped. They decided not to because they didn't want to confuse things with a TV show and a movie that weren't connected, going off and doing their own thing. But Amazon have now bought MGM. Stargate is now an IP that they've got, and there's been a lot of talks about them bringing it back. There's a lot of rumors. There's a lot of just questions in the air. They were actually going to be bringing in a new series made by the series creator Brad Wright, but when that purchase happened, all the deals he had with MGM just got dropped. So it's very possible that we don't end up with a continuation. We end up with a completely new reboot. They also don't know, is it going to be a movie? Are they going to do the trilogy that was kind of planned initially? Or are they going to do just something else? Are they going to do a whole new series like they did with SG-1, but just different? Or will they do a limited run series? It's so up in the air. And with a series like Stargate, I don't know what works best. I know for MCU it's movies. I know for Star Trek it's TV. a show like Stargate, I'm really not sure. And that's where it makes me sort of think that there's not always like a set answer as to what works best. I don't know if that kind of resonates with you at all, Joel.
I think it also depends on the quality and the patience that the production company is putting into something.
Yeah.
It's not perfect, but Rings of Power was very enjoyable and more enjoyable as a series than as another film or a film trilogy.
Agreed. Yeah.
I think that had a great budget. I think the only thing was that some of the writing was rushed and didn't sit well with me, and that was only at the end. For the most part, I really enjoyed the whole thing. It was more like they didn't stick the landing as well as I think they should have. But that to me is an example of taking things that were in film, moving into the series successfully. And in a way that is still the singular story. Like you're still affecting the same world. It's not like a different universe or, anything like that. And it's not a spin-off. It's like it's still telling more of the Middle Earth tales.
Yeah, it's more of a prequel of anything.
Yeah. I mean, they're taking some creative liberties, but there's also like this giant hole. I can't remember the exact dates or wording or whatever, but essentially, there's all this stuff that happens with Galadriel in the Rings of Power series, and there's no record in Tolkien's writings. It's just she's here in one era, and then the next time you'd hear from her or hear of her, she's in a completely different place at a completely different time, and there's like 1,000 years or something in between where like anything could have happened, and so they're kind of filling in the gap. And so that's cool in that they're not tied to like any other, they're tied to the world and the rules of the world, but not necessarily like historical events. They can kind of play around with that kind of stuff, which makes it fresh, because I don't necessarily always want to go and watch a movie that I know kind of like what things are happening. And that brings me to, I think, the last question, which is a shorter one for this roundtable, which is when you're looking at these things, these movies or series, whichever you prefer, or whichever works best for the story, do we want more from the franchises we love? Transformers 7, Star Wars 12, Star Trek 1105. Like what do we want from these, or do we want new things? Do we want? I know Arcane is from a video game, but Arcane is new to animation and series. It's based on the Riot kind of universe stuff. Do we want more fantasy and more sci-fi in that realm? Rebel Moon, I guess, is a good example of sci-fi starting something new. Although I feel like with sci-fi, it's harder because so much of it either just looks like Star Trek or looks like Star Wars. And I'm trying not to pass judgment early, but boy, does Rebel Moon look like Star Wars. Like it really has laser swords and blasters, and you're just like, okay, like I get it. Like laser guns are laser guns, but like it really does have that Star Wars vibe.
It was actually written as Zack Snyder pitched a more mature story, like offshoot storyline of Star Wars back in the early development days. So you're not wrong. It has that look for a reason.
And I'm all for people being inspired by their favorite stuff as well. I think that there's lots of things that are out there that are action movies. Like John Wick is a really good example of an action series that is very comic inspired, and has that kind of vibe to it and works very well. But for me, I think I'd want to see more original fantasy stuff, which can be just as hard to kind of make yourself feel more unique from the world of Tolkien, goblins and orcs and elves and humans and all that stuff, dwarves. And I think one example, while it wasn't executed the best, the Witcher series is a cool fantasy world that's different. Like you're not confusing it with Lord of the Rings at all. And you are 100% invested in the world because they did a decent job of the world building. The storytelling plot wise lost me, but I think overall it was a good original series or new to visual medium in terms of, acting and live action. Because I know that it was a book before and then it was a video game after that. So I'd like to see some new stuff. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like brand new, but there's lots of things out there, books and games and different IPs that have not yet made it to either a limited series or a film. And I think I'd rather see more of those because I feel like we're starting to get into the realm of like Bad Boys 4 and Kung Fu Panda 4 and Like there's just a
Yeah.
lot of stuff that's just seems like it's kind of tired and serialized, and they see the dollar signs and not necessarily trying to make something unique. One trailer that I saw recently, I don't know if I'm really excited to go see it, but it looked fun, was If, starring Ryan Reynolds and directed by John Krasinski. And If is short
Yeah,
for
yeah.
Imaginary Friends. And it has the whole Detective Pikachu vibe where it's like live
Yeah.
action, but then there's an absolute ton of animated characters around. And basically, from what I can tell from the trailer, this young girl or like preteen girl kind of experiences some trauma, and then it allows her to then see everyone else's imaginary friends. But the problem is that all the imaginary friends' kids have grown up and forgotten about them. So these imaginary friends are looking for a friend. And so they all pick her because she can see them, and she's overwhelmed by the whole thing. And then it looks like the story is her trying to find homes for these imaginary friends. And I believe Ryan Reynolds plays some sort of like, not Santa Claus, but like he plays some sort of like man upstairs or a human in charge of all of the misfit imaginary friends. And that's kind of his role in it. And it looks unique and fun, and it's a family film. Like it's one of those things that just kind of it's going to be very accessible. It's not going to be Shakespeare, but it's probably going to be fun.
Even the intro of that trailer gave really big Monsters Inc. vibes as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what I was thinking too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like I want to see more of that. And I think the hard part is just standing out, when you've got the MCU 10 years plus, you've got Star Wars doing all kinds of different series and Disney Plus pushing that. And then you've got a couple of things on Netflix and that kind of stuff all going. Amazon has got a number of series that are going now too. Like I really enjoyed Jack Ryan. Reacher season 2 just hit Amazon, so that's out now. They're not in that sci-fi fantasy thing. Like they're unique shows and they're cool, but like specifically I was trying to think of more of the kind of genre that I really, really enjoy, the escapism that I really, really like. James, do you have anything that you'd like to see brought to live action, or do you have a preference with like you just want more installments of one of your favorite franchises?
I'm selfish. I want both. I want more new installments and I want new ideas. So like on the one hand, I don't mind more installments, but more than that, I think what I like is when an existing franchise gets like a nice creative reinterpretation. So we've talked before about Star Wars Visions, for example. I thought that was a great kind of breath of fresh air, great new twist on Star Wars. To borrow something from 2023, one of my favorite anime was the show called Trigun Stampede, and Trigun was a manga series anime back in the 90s. And again, new creators brought a breath of fresh air to this show and put a whole new spin on it and really made it their own. And I find those kind of reinterpretations really fascinating, especially for big franchises. At the same time, though, it'd be nice to see some new sci-fi that's a little more optimistic. I like my dystopian sci-fi, don't get me wrong. I like Battlestar Galactica, I like Ghost in the Shell, talked about that over the years. But it'd be nice to see more sci-fi borrow from Star Trek a little bit. It'd be a bit more optimistic. I just feel like sci-fi has been stuck in that dystopian kind of feel for a while now. Even Star Wars, to a degree. There's been a lot of just that dark, gritty, dystopian sci-fi, and I'd like something a little more positive and optimistic. That's why it's great to see so many Star Trek shows out. Most of them are a bit more optimistic. Picard gets a little nitty gritty at times, but yeah, it'd be nice to see some more optimistic sci-fi in the future.
I agree. That's one of the reasons I've actually been really enjoying Quantum Leap, which is a continuation of the original series, and it's simplistic. It's not sort of hard hitting and stuff, but it's fun, and they are definitely going for a very optimistic tone. And I really love just how it is starting to develop over time. They've just wrapped season 2, and I'm looking forward to what happens next season. But yeah, I think is really the only one that's actually out at the moment that is optimistic outside of Star Trek.
I forgot about Quantum Leap. I should go look that up. I enjoyed the original series. Glad to hear it's good.
Yeah, it's different. It's by the same. It's by Donald Belisario, who created the original series. He has made a few tweaks since the original series, but I do like what he's done with it. As time goes on, you start to see how they're developing it, and it's worth sticking with in that regard.
I had high hopes for Wheel of Time, which I know you're watching, Stephen. I bailed after a few episodes into the second season just because I found it constipated and I couldn't really follow what was going on because no one would actually say what they were feeling. They would just kind of look at the camera and go, and you're just like, I don't know what you mean. Like, could you give me more? And if you don't know the books or don't know the source material, then you're kind of at a loss. So how are you feeling about it as like a new fantasy or new to us fantasy show?
For me, I saw a clip on TikTok. I'm like, that looks really cool. What's that from? And then I found that it was from The Wheel of Time. Then I went to IMDb and it looked like, people were complaining about season 1 and the season finale had like, I don't know, a 6 point something. So we went into it with not the highest of expectations, and so I guess we haven't been let down. We're actually enjoying it quite a bit. Haven't we just finished season 1, and so we haven't had a chance to do season 2 yet, but I think it's interesting. The special effects in the season finale of season 1 were, it's like they just said, well, we have these Trollocs, these troll-like characters, and we're gonna put them in a dark valley in the shadow. Oh, but they're hard to see, so we'll like HDR the heck out of this so that you can see in the shadows. And so like the shadows were almost as bright as the highlights. It was just this really, really weird highlight shadow choice. I have no idea why they did it, but I mean, storyline wise, I find it interesting. It seems like it's an original. Different parts of it are pretty original to me. So far, so good.
I think one of the problems that it gets online is that it's from a pretty well-read book series that's really deep. And just like anything, if you've got a big following in the literary space, if you leave anything out, which you ultimately have to do if you're translating novels to screen, like you can't please everybody, right? And then the loud internet ends up, crapping all over your thing. I mean, I'm seeing it as a 7.2 on IMDb and an 83% on Rotten Tomatoes. So it's not panned, like it's not terrible.
No.
I found it a little inaccessible in season 2. It's been a really long time since I watched season 1, and I had the same sort of feelings that you did. There's a couple spots where I was like, this doesn't feel like it's well made. I remember talking about it on the Citadel Cafe, being just like, this makes me concerned for Lord of the Rings, because like the streaming quality, and then like you said, the HDR and the filming quality was just not there. And you're like, this is washed out and it's hard to see. Like I want to see, like, those sets and those costumes look amazing, and I can't see them because they're blurry or they're in the dark or they're overlit and you can't see the details. And so it became kind of a battle visually, and that gets distracting. And then you're not paying attention to all the constipated acting that was happening. So, and I like some of the actors and some of the characters are cool and it's interesting concepts. Like I can't remember the names of everything, but like the main woman and her powers, and she's got a consort, like she's got a protector in their relationship. It's kind of it's a unique thing that I've not seen in a fantasy world before. Like it's different than The Witcher, it's different than Lord of the Rings. So that kind of stuff I thought was cool, but I found it hard to get into. And I think that these series could do a better job of slowing down. Like if there is a famous fantasy novel out there that someone wants to bring to Amazon or Netflix or whatever, I'd be down for a slow season, like a slow burn. Build the world and build a couple of key characters. Like you don't have to have 6, like build 2 and make them important and choose the actors carefully and to take your time to build something. And I think that just like the DC universe, a lot of series end up rushing it. And then because you're like, I didn't read the book, so like I'm not following. This seems to be moving at a really, really fast pace. And again, to bring up Arcane, I think that was a series that did that very well. Like they had a decent pace, but they were able to build the world and kind of like you'd have a question and it would be answered either that episode or the next episode, and then they would kind of move on and build out the world from there. And I thought that was really, really cool. So we'll move on into the Internet Minute, which is brought to you by you, dear listener. The Citadel Cafe is 100% listener supported. If you're getting value out of the show, please consider putting a little bit of value back in. You can become a member at patreon.com/the Citadel Cafe. Joining at any level will get you an invite into the member-only Discord server, which is shared with my personal Discord, and give you access to the Barista Cut bonus audio sessions. Special thanks to the Bean Counter patrons, Cosmic and Smurf588. Thank you ever so much for your support on this episode. And thanks to all of our patrons over the past year that have continued to support the Citadel Cafe. It is no small thing and is not lost on me that the time that goes into making the Citadel Cafe is sponsored by all of you. It really helps make the show possible, and I can't thank you enough. Patron count is at 27, which is down 1 from last week. So if you'd like to join, there's lots of room. If you'd like to be patron number 28, visit patreon.com/The Citadel Cafe. I'm going to keep these short and sweet as we are pressing up against a longer show this time around. And I have a little bit of a holiday recommendation. Stella Catherine Cole, or Stella Cole, on Instagram and Apple Music, you can also find her on Spotify, is a jazz singer. And I believe she's based in New York. She travels around singing, so she's always in different places around the world doing like jazz lounges and stuff. She has a classic voice. She's incredibly talented. And she starts to sing and it sounds like the 20s and the 30s or classic Christmas carols, which she's been doing a lot of on social media. So if you want to hear snippets of your favorites, go check out Stella Catherine Cole on Instagram. We'll have links in the show notes. But she has a single out called Christmas Dreaming, and that's on Apple Music and Spotify. And I know she's trying to get a lot of people to go at least listen to it, like it, kind of bump it up on the charts. So if you enjoy it, then do your best to share it around. She's independent. She doesn't have a label, so this is all her own doing. I believe she has to support like the studio fees and all that kind of stuff herself, but she's just so talented. And one listen and you'll understand exactly what I mean. So check out Stella Catherine Cole on Instagram or Apple Music. James, what's your pick this week?
I do have a pick. I have a YouTube video. A little bit of context for my pick. Bill Watterson, the creator of Calvin and Hobbes, released a new book in 2023 called The Mysteries. And it's sort of described as a fable for adults. And the book is actually a collaboration between him and this famous caricature artist, John Cashed. I think I'm pronouncing that right, Cashed. The two of them collaborated on the images together, and the story is written by Watterson himself. And to talk about the release of the book, they put out this YouTube video. It's about 15 minutes long with an audio interview with the two of them talking about collaborating on the images together. It's really fascinating to hear two really accomplished artists talk about their struggle to collaborate with each other and put together this book. So I included that, and I think that'll be in the show notes. I thought it was a really fascinating watch.
Stephen, what's your pick this week?
Mine's a bit of an odd one, but it's a text to ASCII art generator. It's a little gem of a website I found ages ago that basically allows you to type in any words you want to, and it'll create ASCII artwork, which is basically means it'll take other characters and then recreate your word as like a larger version made up of different characters. And I've been doing some freelance web design, which reminded me of it because I would use that to actually create really large headers for my code. So when I'm scrolling through code quickly, it's, if there's a section in my styles that's specific about headings or column widths, then it's just this massive word that says headings and columns. So it just allows me to just scroll through stuff really quickly, and it makes it a lot easier to weed through hundreds and hundreds of lines of text.
And Alastair, what's your pick this week?
Mine's one that was actually released on Christmas Day of last year, but it just came up in the YouTube algorithm for me just in the last week or so. It's from a channel called Cinema Therapy, and the video is called Relationship Therapist Ranks Love Actually Romances. So it's by Alan Seawright, who's a filmmaker, and Jonathan Decker, who's a licensed therapist. And they basically just take a look at this romantic Christmas classic that has not aged well. And they kind of go through like which are the relationships that were doomed for failure, that are horrible with, you just don't want to be in those. But they build their way up to the healthiest relationships. I do like that they do it in that order. And so there are a couple in there where they really kind of point out, but it's really interesting, especially when they go through Alan Rickman and Emma Thompson's performance, which is by far some of the most outstanding part of that movie. It's really nice seeing them break down that relationship and how they did all of that. That I thought was an interesting one and somewhat Christmassy.
Well, that wraps up this episode of the Citadel Cafe and the year on the Citadel Cafe. You can get more information about the show and links to some of the things that we talked about at thecitadelcafe.com. Music for the show was composed by Kevin MacLeod, and you can email the show at thecitadelcafe@gmail.com. Find the show by name on social media. Subscribe for free on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, really wherever you can find a podcast. Be sure to leave a rating and review on your favorite platform. It's a great way to boost the podcast, as well as word of mouth. It's the easiest way to support the show. Just tell a friend about the Citadel Cafe and where they can go to listen to it. My name is Joel Duggan. You can find everything I am doing online at joelduggan.com. That includes my other podcast all about Minecraft at thespawnchunks.com. Pre-recorded episodes during December. Those new episodes will be airing every Monday, so we are not going to miss a week over the holidays. So check out thespawnchunks.com or again on your favorite podcast app. I'm Joel Duggan on social media and Joel Duggan on Twitch. I normally stream about 3 or 4 days a week, but that schedule is going to be shifting a bit over the holidays because I normally stream on weekends, and both holidays this time of year happen to be over the weekend. So we'll see how that goes. Big thank you to James the Civilian, who is like the wind everywhere and nowhere. Thanks for being here, James.
No problem. Thank you.
You can find Stephen at StephenESC on Twitch and on social media. Thanks so much for taking the time, Stephen. Good to see you as always.
Yeah, happy to be here.
And Alastair can be found at Long Range Sensors, a Star Trek retrospective podcast, and at Alastair McFly on Twitch. Thanks again, man. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Absolutely. Always is.
You have been listening to the Citadel Cafe, where we are fast, easy, and cheap, but you can only pick 2.